this episode of Jeep 411, we're going to be talking about tire pressures. Of course, tire pressures are extremely important for off-road driving. Airing down tires offers several advantages to having aired up tires on the trail. The most important is the tire contact patch spreads out, and that increases the area of the contact patch on the ground, which increases traction. It also improves ride quality, and that's pretty important, especially when you're getting older like I am. And it reduces the possibility of a puncture because the tire becomes more compliant. And it also does less damage to the road surface because now the load is spread out over a bigger area of the ground. You're not damaging the trail surface as much. Another important reason, if you're rock crawling, is it allows that tire contact patch to wrap around the rock, which makes rock crawling much easier. It also gives you more grip on things like side slopes and hill climbs and descents, all really important when you're tackling the more difficult terrain. The only downside to airing down tires is actually losing some ground clearance. So there's a fine line between picking the right pressure for better traction and going too low and allowing or reducing the amount of ground clearance you have. That can cause problems as well. You can get hung up on obstacles and actually do damage to the underside of your vehicle. The tire pressure isn't the most important element of what we're trying to achieve. Really what we're looking at is the amount of tire contact patch spread, and we can do that by looking at how much the tire is actually being aired down. The easiest way to do that is a method we've been using for several years that was developed by an old friend, Harry Llewellyn, who sells the Coyote deflators and also the Coyote internal bead locks, which are a great product, especially if you're going high speed in the desert but and need that extra protection. The method he uses is to actually measure the tire sidewall height at the maximum inflation pressure, which for the tires we're on now, the 37-inch Rhodian MTX, would be about 60 psi. There's not much difference between 50 and 60 psi, so we usually measure it around 50 psi. And then we air that tire down until we're at about 85% of the sidewall height. The sidewall height on a 37-inch tire is approximately 10 inches. That's a 37-inch tire minus a 17-inch wheel. Gives you a 20 inches of tire sidewall, 10 on the top, 10 on the bottom. So we have a 10-inch sidewall. That means that we want to air that tire down to about 85% of that, or 8.5 inches. That size tire makes it real easy to do the math because it's 10 inches, and that just makes it simple. But it applies to any size tire, and it really does work. 85% is a good compromise between ride height and ground clearance and getting a good tire contact patch spread. The big difference comes in what pressure does it take to get to that 85% number. And we use 85% for most off-roading, for general off-roading, not for all conditions. If we're in snow or on ice that's relatively smooth, or especially on sand, we're going to air down more, maybe going down as low as 75%. We found that if you go below 75%, you risk pinching the tire sidewall against the rim and an obstacle, and that can damage the tire. So we never like to go below 75%, but we found that 85% works in most cases. If you're on a really smooth dirt road, you could probably go down to 90% just to get a little bit better traction and a little bit of ride comfort. But for the most part, 85% works really well. If we get to sand, we're going to go down another few pounds to get down to around below 80%, somewhere around 75% of that number, which on a 10-inch sidewall would be 7 inches. So the big question is, what pressure is required to get down to that? Well, that varies from tire to tire and vehicle to vehicle. Our 6,000-pound JKUs, which are pretty heavily loaded, are going to be running at a very different tire pressure than the same exact tire on our new YJ rock crawler, which is going to weigh under 4,000 pounds. So it doesn't have nearly as much load on the tire. The other factor that comes into play, and it's really important, is how stiff the tire sidewall is. We're currently running the Nexen Rodian MTX, which even though it has an F rating on the sidewall, and it's a very tough sidewall, it actually is a very flexible sidewall, which means you don't have to lower the pressure nearly as much. For us to get down to that 85% number on these tires, we're only coming down to 14 PSI. When we were running the Falcon Wild Peak MTs, which is a very good tire, but it's much stiffer in the sidewall, we'd have to go down to 10 PSI to get the same tire contact patch spread. So there's a significant difference between those tires, and there's a lot in between, and probably some tires a little bit softer that can run a higher pressure, and some tires a little bit stiffer that need a lower pressure. But to really get dialed in on your tire pressures, it's important to take those measurements. And in another episode of Jeep 411, we'll be looking at how to take those measurements easily so you can find out what the optimum pressure is on your vehicle with the tires you're running. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Jeep 411, and hopefully you've learned something as well. And please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we'll be seeing you soon on another episode of Jeep 411.